Hi, I'm back with the second part of my look at Chaz and Dave, as I threatened. So, just to recap, if you haven't seen the first part, go back and watch it. If you have, you probably remember that it was all about basically how their careers went before they became what would become known as Chaz and Dave. So, Chaz and Dave, Chaz Hodges, Dave Peacock. So, they did record together before they went by the name of Chaz and Dave, as we saw in the last part. Their first album together was Country Pie, which they recorded in 1971. So that was a kind of a rock and roll, piano-led rock and roll and country record in the sort of vein of Jerry Lee Lewis, but there's bits of banjo and country in there as well. Then they started calling themselves Oily Rags, which of course is Cockney rhyming slang for a fag or a cigarette. And that was released in 1974, and it was kind of a country rock album, really. Rootsy stuff. Didn't really foreshadow the type of music that they would become known for doing. Anyway, so when Chaz and Dave met in 1963 in the back of a car, Chaz was getting a lift from an old school friend called Brian Juniper, who he played in skiffle band with. He just happened to bump into Dave, who was sat in the back of the car that was playing with Brian Juniper at the time. And they found through talking that they had a kind of a shared interest in rock and roll, in country music, and perhaps importantly as well for the direction they'd go in, music hall. For those of you probably in the States and maybe some in the UK, music hall was a style of music that was very popular through the kind of the end of the 19th century and into the 20th century, so sort of very Victorian and Edwardian times. And you had, here's a CD I've got of some of the stuff, and lots of sort of acts where they would be a character. So you had someone like, what was her name? Vesta Victoria, who was a male impersonator. And then you get people like George Formby Sr., who, not the famous George Formby, his father, who was kind of like his act was being from Lancashire. And probably most famous for Chaz and Dave anyway, or the most inspirational, was a guy called Harry Champion. And Harry Champion, his act was being a kind of a Cockney.
Around to see me on the game. She said to me, your uncle, bless you, is watching chain. I put it on right across my vest. Thought it looked as dainty as it dangled on my chest. Just to flash it off, I feel like I'm walking round about. The kids, they all ran after me and they all began to shout. Any old iron, any old iron, any old iron. You look neat. Talk about the trees. You look a dapper from your nepper to your peak. Dressed in style with a brand new style and your father's old green tie on. Oh, I wouldn't give you tuppence for your old watch chain. Old iron, old iron.
So there we have Harry Champion. So Dave and Chaz found that they had a kind of an interest in this music, and they kind of wanted to kind of use it in going forward. And as I mentioned in the previous video, Chaz had been playing with sort of country bands, and as had Dave. But Chaz kind of thought, well, I'd like to use my own voice. I feel silly trying to pretend to be American when I'm not. And so they decided to sort of meld these interests together: the rock and roll, the country, and the music hall. And in 1975, they released their first album, One Thing and Another, and it was on Retreat Records, which was set up by Derek Lawrence and Big Jim Sullivan, that they both worked with prior to this. And this isn't actually the original copy. The original one has a different cover. This is a re-release on EMI from 1979 after they had a bit of success. And it does start to begin to sound a bit like what we would perhaps think Chas and Dave sound like, but it really isn't there. It's kind of proto Chas and Dave. You've got songs on here. I mean, what would I say that Chas and Dave do? They do a sort of a nostalgia in all of their stuff, be it harking back to music hall or even back to the 1950s with the rock and roll. So there's a sort of a nostalgia about the culture, a nostalgia about the music, a nostalgia about what they remembered, their pasts. And that kind of comes through in all of the music. And the opener on this, which is called Ponder's End Allotment Club, is a prime example of that. It's a sort of a ballad, but it's a sentimental, sweetly sentimental, nostalgic song about a club and the sorts of people that would go there. Better Get Your Shoes On is a sort of a nice little upbeat tune. Not really sort of the piano-led stuff that you recognise later. The Ballad of the Rich and Dry Party are kind of a sort of kind of ballad. Dry Party is a sort of a rocker. Ballad of the Rich is a ballad, and then Deceived is very much a country rock tune. So they're still not there. But it's on the second side of this where I think you start to get an idea of the sort of band they would become. They do the song One Thing and Another that they had performed, Big Jim Sullivan had done it on the album they worked on. But that is probably one of the first sort of songs that you would perhaps think of being a sort of a Chas and Dave. It's that blending of rock and roll and the Cockney music hall, and One Thing and Another gives you that. It sort of paints that life of a Cockney household. It's one of my favourite songs of theirs. Then you've got It's So Hard, which is a country rock song with fiddles on it, and then there's Wurcher. Now Wurcher is a phrase that was used, and it kind of means what the fuck. Sorry. Do apologise. What do you mean? What's going on? Wow! It's an exclamation. What the fuck? And they would redo the song as Gertcher later on, and that's that's probably one of their most famous songs. So, but Wurcher is a slower version. It's kind of got a nice almost sort of new wavy bass line to it. But yeah. And then there's I'm a Rocker, which kind of does what it says on the tin, clearly. And then you've got a couple of ballads, Old Time Song and Old Dog and Me, which is, again, one of my favourite songs of theirs. It's a kind of a acoustic ballad with some strings. A nostalgic story about a guy and an old man and his dog. So, yeah. So that's their first album. I really want to get hold of the original copy because it's got a great cover. In 1977, they released their second album. This is Rockney. And Rockney being a portmanteau word that they created to sort of put together rock and roll and Cockney. This is I think it's a great cover, this one. It's not like a lot of the stuff that you'd see later from them. This is what you've got here is, what's the name of it? It's F. Cook. It's a pie and mash shop, and unfortunately, I actually saw a thing that this was from 1977, and there's a picture of them on the back there. I love that picture of them; it's great, really moody. So there's a picture of them in front of this pie and mash shop, and unfortunately, I read that this pie and mash shop closed down earlier this year. A kind of a sort of an end to an era, really. So this is their second album. It's the first album on a major label. It's on EMI. They signed to EMI, and this is, I think it's a really, 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 really fine album. I think the first album is a flawed record, but this, I think, is perfect. I think it's great. It's not what you would expect from a Chas and Dave record, but it's definitely going in the right direction. It starts with a rocker. What's that all about? Which basically kind of sets in place what they're going to do. So the lyrics: we're going to show you what it's all about. We guarantee it's going to knock you out. We've got a drummer and a piano and a bass guitar. That's what it's all about. Yeah. So they're laying down in their intro what they intend to do. I kind of like that. There's a couple of bands that do that. The sort of an introductory song. I suppose almost like the Beatles, isn't it, with Sgt. Pepper. Yeah, so it's a rocker tune. And then they get the next track is Big Fat Rat, which I'm not a big fan of. It's a kind of a rocking kind of music hall song. But Big Fat Rat is about a woman, and I think it's a bit unkind, really, on big fat women. So yeah, but then that is something that they would be accused of. There is a slight, I suppose, end of the pier misogyny, very much of its time, that runs through a lot of this stuff, which we'll perhaps cover later as well. And then you got Strummin', which is a kind of talking country tune, a bit like a boy named Sue by Johnny Cash. It's that kind of stuff, all about a guy learning how to play the guitar. Then you got Love and Days Gone By, which is a nice sweet ballad. Punch in the Willow Warbler, which is a sort of a kind of a country tune about a boxing match at Madison Square Gardens. So they are still doing the sort of country stuff, and there are country sounds in here. Like that opening track, That's What It's All About, does have pedal steel guitar on it. On the second side, we've got Massage Parlour, which is a sort of a funny tune about the virtues of a massage parlour, and then eventually marrying the masseur. Very much the sort of song you would expect from them later on in their career. Billy Tyler is a countryish ballad, and Edmonton Green, I think, is their first classic. It's a nostalgic song about an area of North London, Edmonton Green, where they grew up, and it's talking about the sort of the end of a culture, the places that are gone, the rough boozers that have been pulled down, and the cinemas that are gone. It's a culture that's being lost, and they're kind of harking back to it. And I think it's a wonderful tune. And then another great song they finish with, as a penultimate song called I'm in Trouble, which is basically a conversation between two blokes down the boozer, swapping, how you doing? I'm all right. How are you, mate? I'm fine. What are you drinking? That kind of stuff. But then they're in trouble because they're down the boozer, and their wives are looking for them. So it's kind of punctuated by the chorus being someone phoning, and it's their wife, one of their wives phoning. Eventually it has them having to dive out of the pub because their wives have come to try and find them. Again, it's that sort of slightly misogynistic, very sort of 70s type of thing. I mean, it's not terrible, but it does perpetuate a kind of a stereotype of the old wife that's a bit of a boiler. And then it finishes with Sling Your Hook, which is a term for get lost, go away. And it's basically a combination of different ways to say sling your hook. Which kind of like, seeing as you've got the opening introduction to the record, it finishes with basically telling you to go away, and I like that. Great stuff. I think that is a bit of a lost classic. If you haven't heard it, I would definitely check it out. It's probably one of their stronger albums, even though it isn't really what Chas and Dave would become famous for. But that would all change because something's going to happen that sets them onto a trajectory to stardom. But that's after these messages.
Now I'm going back a few years when partners knew a bit about beer. If it wasn't Curry's best, that's when you'd hear this strange protest. Funny glasses with a little piece of ice. Anything that comes with lemon in a slice. Fancy cocktails that are shaken and not stirred. Drinks with cherries in that make you look absurd. With your finger cocked to leave your friends impressed. Anything that ain't a pint of Curry's best. Mine's a pint of best.
Remember a pint of best. Courage do.
When your old girl starts talking and she won't give it a rest. If you want my advice, mate, I'd have a pint of courage bed. It's so gold and clear and beautiful that I can hardly wait. Without a doubt, it's one of the things that makes this country great. They ought to have a pint on exhibition in the tape. You can't get nothing like it. A lovely pint of courage bed.
Remember a pint of best. Courage do.
Hello there, mate. Is your mower up the spout? Well, it's got a bit of rust. There's a lot of it about. Still have a pint of best, mate. Take a little breather. You're right. I deserve it. I've been working like a beaver.
Courage best, courage best, courage best beats all the rest. Don't take my word for it, put it to the test. Courage best beats all the rest. Well, I've been to the east and I've been to the west and I've had a drink in Budapest. To tell the truth, I wasn't impressed. There's nothing in the world like courage best. Danny Hatchell, son, here's to me and you. Cheers, I think the barmaid fancies you. Blimey, don't look now, mate. Guess who's coming here? She's coming here for something and it ain't a pint of beer. Courage best of a pint of best, but the pint of best beats all the rest. Don't take my word for it, put it to the test. Courage best beats all the rest. Courage best of a
Remember a pint of best. Courage do.
Cheers. Welcome back. Now, in 1978, a guy called Bob Trott, who worked for an advertising agency, happened upon Chas and Dave playing in a pub, and he thought that their music would go perfectly for an advertising campaign he was working on for Courage Brewery. That sort of nostalgic music hall thing that kind of harked back to a bygone era was exactly what they were going for. And so Chas and Dave did a version of Wurcher for them. Now, they changed it to Gurcher, which apparently is an equally used version of Wurcher. But for an advert, they obviously needed to speed it up so it could fit in that 30-second slot. And it went out, and it was a massive success. The advert was very popular. And they were sort of pushed then by their record label to put one out, or to put the song out. But of course, they'd only done this 30-second version. So they, or it was a case of putting out the original Wurcher, which was a very different song, a different feel altogether, and clearly a different title. So what they did is they went into the studio and they recorded a long version of the version they did as the advert, and they put it out, and it got to number 20 in the charts. So this is them on the way to success, really. They would do a number of other, I think there were 8 songs in total that they would do for the Courage adverts. And 4 of them appear on this little single, a promotional single put out by Courage Brewery. Probably, I don't know how many beers you'd have to drink to get one of these free, or whether if you drunk too many you wouldn't be able to listen to it anyway. Anyway, so yeah, it has their other big tune that was used and popular, which you can see on the cover there, Rabbit, which is rabbit and pork, talk, Cockney rhyming slang. You got more rabbit than Sainsbury's. Why don't you give it a rest? Sideboard Song, Gurcher, and I'm in Trouble, which were 4 of the ones used. So there were 8 that they did for the adverts. The only one that they wrote specifically for the advert was Margate, or Margit, as it's sang. And there's Chas and Dave on the beach in Margate. There's a great video for that. Check it out. So yeah, the only one that they wrote for it. So on the back of this, they released their 3rd album. This is Don't Give a Monkeys, which is Don't Give a Monkey's Toss, or Don't Give a Monkey's Uncle. Well-known phrase. And this, on the first side, replicates much of what's on that EP. You've got Gurcher, Rabbit, Sideboard Song. It's got What a Miserable Night, which was also used, and Banging in Your Head. So they were all tracks that were used on the Courage adverts. The B side of this is a live recording from Abbey Road Studios. So clearly this was a kind of a rushed affair, that the songs that they did were specifically for the adverts, and they filled it up with a live recording. It's perhaps, I think, it's good. Oh yeah, I forgot to say. So this is on their Rockney label, although this is on EMI. It is on their Rockney label that they set up. And yeah, it's a classic sort of. It's got their classic songs. I suppose some people might call them novelty songs. I would disagree. I don't think they're novelty songs at all. If you're going to call Rabbit and Gertrude a novelty song, you've also got to call, I don't know, "Hit Me With Your Rhythm Stick" by Ian Jury, or "Reasons to Be Cheerful," or even things like "Dedicated Follower of Fashion" by the Kinks, or "Baggy Trousers" by Madness. You know, so it's not a Mr. Blobby song. It's not that sort of thing. But yeah, there is a certain novelty to them. Maybe because it's a novelty, because they're the only people doing it. Anyway, so they left EMI after that album, and EMI cashed in on it on their success by re-releasing their first album, One Thing and Another. But Chas and Dave then released what's it called? It's called Mustn't Grumble, isn't it? Mustn't Grumble. This is from 1981, and this is the first one on their own label after EMI. And I think that this is a little rushed. I don't think this is a particularly great album. It certainly doesn't have the quality of songs, generally speaking, apart from perhaps a couple of exceptions, that their previous albums have had. It opens with "Poor Old Mr. Woogie," which is a boogie woogie song, sort of in the sort of vein of Fats Domino. Bored Stiff, very Ian Jury and the Blockheads. Don't Speak English Anymore, which is all about people using slang terms. Turn That Noise Down, which has got a kind of... There's a lot of slap bass on this, which I don't think really suits them particularly well. And it dates it quite badly. What anything else I wrote about? Yeah, not really. But it's got Lonnie D, which is a song about Lonnie Donegan, which is a kind of obviously a skiffly tune. And it finishes with Rabbit, and a re-recording of Rabbit that they put on there. But it does have their, I don't know, maybe their career-defining song. Certainly, it's the song that was their biggest hit, and that is "Aint No Pleasing You," which is a lovely sort of piano-led ballad with strings, perhaps a bit too many strings. Too many? Not too many. Too much. It's a bit over the top. The strings arrangement was done by Chas himself. He was taught how to arrange by Big Jim Sullivan when he worked with him in the past. And yeah, it got to number 2 in the charts. Or, if you listen to Chas Hodges, it got to number 1 in the Melody Maker chart. But apart from that and a couple of other songs, I think that's a bit of a disappointing album. But it's still good. Still good. Check it out. I mean, you've got to check it out for Aint No Pleasing You, which is a classic. EMI were continuing to milk them for everything they had after they left. So they release Live at Abbey Road in 1981. This is far more rock and roll heavy than their previous stuff. I mean, I suppose it replicates that sound of them live, which is it's really just the three of them, Chas and Dave and Mick Burt on drums. Now this does have, if I'm not mistaken, it's got his old pal from Heads, Hands and Feet. Albert Lee turn up playing some guitar on it as well. But yeah, it's a nice album. It's got cover versions, live versions of Gertrude, I'm a Rocker, Big Fat Rat. It's got one of my favourite songs of theirs, which is actually a B-side, which is called Scruffy Old Cow. Again, with the misogynistic songs, very much of their time. But yeah, a great tune that. It was a B-side to, I think, Old Dog and Me, which is from their first album. So they then released their proper next album, which is Job Lot. This was released in 1982. Did I? No, yeah. In 1982, and this is more like it, if you ask me. This is them refinding, rediscovering the sort of the quality of writing and the sort of the looseness that they had with their original songs, like Gertrude and Rabbit and things like that. And it starts with that old piano, which is a smashing piano kind of blues tune. Basically, sort of the best song that Fats Domino never recorded. London Girls was a single from this, which is a lovely kind of music hall tune. There is a version I've seen on YouTube done by a Belgian couple, which is called Antwerpen Girls. Check it out. It's a bit bizarre. Give it some Stick Mick, by which is a kind of an instrumental which gives Mick Burt the opportunity to do lots of drum solos. No Body is a nice kind of sort of sad ballad. And then Flying, which is a lovely closer, which is just an instrumental. You've got Margate's on here, Mustn't Grumble, which is a great tune. And then they finish with another classic, I think, which is Wish I Could Write a Love Song. And I think if anything goes to prove that Chas Hodges was a great songwriter, I think that proves it, really. I mean, most of the stuff that they produced was written by both of them. I think the all of their songs, very very Lennon and McCartney, is written from both of them, and they do share the vocals across the songs. Obviously, some are Chas's ones and some are Dave's. Dave tends to be slightly more countrified, and obviously Chas has got a much better rock and roll voice. And they do have a very interesting sort of singing style, which I think people who know them would recognise immediately. And it's a kind of a kind of a unison harmony that they do, where Chas takes a low part, and Dave fills in with a sort of a unison higher register harmony, which makes them very unique, I think. So in 1983, they got their own TV show, ran for 6 episodes on ITV, which was a kind of a variety show with guests on and comedians. They had some of the guests they had Eric Burden from the Animals. We've got Lulu, Mike Berry that Chas used to work with, Flying Pickets, Captain Sensible, Lonnie Donegan, and Eric Clapton turns up with Albert Lee again on a Christmas episode. And that started to be shown on Channel 5 every year, which is a nice new tradition, if you ask me. Anyway, one of the other people who was a guest was the American rock and roll blues guy, Clarence Frogman Henry. What was this hit? You ain't got a home. That's the one, yeah. Anyway, less of that. And while he was there, they managed to get him to the studio. And he had actually already recorded a version of Aint No Pleasing You. I actually haven't got a copy of that. But they recorded him doing That Old Piano. And there he is, sat at that old piano. And it's great. It's wonderful. It's exactly what you expect of a sort of a Fats Domino-esque sort of piano blues rock and roller. So really worth checking out that. Good tune. Also in 1983, Chas teamed up with Roy Wood, Phil Lynott and John Coughlan from Status Quo as rockers, and they released a single. This is called We Are the Boys, who make all the noise. And it's very much in the same vein. If anyone knows the Stars on 45 kind of medley hit, that was a medley of Beatles tunes, it started a bit of a craze around this time, and this is exactly what this is. It starts with a tune and ends with a tune called We Are the Boys, who make all the noise, written by Roy Wood. And then sandwiched between them is Great Balls of Fire, Keep a Knockin', Johnny Be Good, Roll Over Beethoven, yeah, and Chantilly Lace. Yeah, it's good. You know, very much a novelty song. Check it out. There's a video of them online playing it. So nice, interesting side project. Okay, back to the main deal. So this is Well Pleased. This was released in 1984. Now, the album cover freaks me out with this one a bit, because the front has they're showing the back of the album, and you look at the back of the album, there it is, but they're showing the front of the album, and the front of the album has the back of the album showing the front of the album, and the front. Do you get what I'm saying? It goes on infinitely into the distance of Chaz and Dave, back and front, back and front, back and front. Yeah, keeps me awake at night. That. Anyway, a great album. I think this. It's really good. Some great tunes on here. We've got what's on it? We've got There in Your Eyes, which is a classic sort of rock and roll tune. Snake Eyes Bert is a sort of a country-esque sort of talking tune, a bit like Boy Named Sue, which is all about a card game. I think it's a card game. Yeah. And then Where Am I Going to Find You? Lovely sort of ballad. I Wonder in Whose Arms. I Wonder in Whose Arms, which is one of those songs that when you hear it, you think, oh, that must be a Jerry Lee Lewis tune or a Fats Domino tune. But it isn't. It's written by Chaz and Dave, and it's great. Jump in the Lights is a bit light. Haha. I'm Going Back. Really sweet, nostalgic tune, that one. Harry Was a Champion, which is about Harry Champion, the music hall guy who you saw earlier. A solid album. Worth checking out, that one. Okay, in 86, they released a Christmas album. Inevitably, you could probably suggest. But I think this is a little bit of a corker, this one. It's a simple thing. It's them, piano, bass, and often augmented with the Cambridge Heath Salvation Army Band. So I know I don't know if you know, but I agree that I'm having a bit of a meltdown. I do apologise. Yeah, the sound of a Salvation Army Band playing Christmas carols is very evocative. I think you'd probably agree, and that really makes that album a little gem, I think. And I can't wait for Christmas to have an excuse to play it. Then we have Flying. And Flying was released in 87, and it would be their last album for, well, about 30 years of their own material. There would be more albums they would do, but this is the last one they did of their own material for over 30 years. And it's a quite good way to go out. It's a solid album. It starts with a tune called England, which is another one of those list tunes. It's a guy coming back from overseas, listing all the things he's looking forward to seeing when he comes back to England. Now, it could be jingoistic or nationalistic, but it isn't, because I think they do a quite clever thing. They put it to a calypso rhythm with steel drums and everything. So all that sort of jingoism kind of goes out the window under those circumstances. Punchinello, which is about Punch and Judy. Sunday is a good tune. The Diddle-Um a Day song, which is very musical and that I could probably do without. And Flying, which the album gets its title from, is a version with words to the song they'd done on an earlier album. Apparently Daisy, Chaz's mother, loved the tune and said, why didn't you write some words for it? So he did. Exhibition Rag, which is a ragtime tune. I Can Get Along Without You, which is a beautiful little sad sort of nostalgic tune. Back in the Soul Days, sort of Atlantic soul style. Miss You All the Time is a really nice sort of tune. Another sort of ballad. But the interesting one on the B-side is one called That Telephone Thing. And what can I say about That Telephone Thing? Well, it nicks the guitar line from David Bowie's Golden Years. Well, I think it does. And on top of that, you basically get Dave rapping. It's kind of Rockney rapping. But I suppose in a similar sort of way that you get with Blondie on Rapture. So if you imagine a kind of a Cockney version of an amalgamation of Rapture by Blondie and Bowie's Golden Years, you get something along the lines of what that tune's about. Anyway, so this would be their last album for, I think 30 years. But there was something else that they were doing in that meantime, and I will explain that in my next video. So until then, cheers!